I know, we left
We'll
because
try.
we did a pre-briefing and
We'll
we
try.
went over that, but he's gone, he's ready.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you good with sound?
That's the best shot.
Okay. That's perfect.
All cell phones on silent. Everyone. Double check before.
Okay, so just relax, and I know you can tell your story better than anybody. Okay, go ahead.
Okay now. Okay. I had the good fortune of having been born in Atlanta. I was born at Grady Hospital, and I'm what they refer to as a Grady baby.
Okay, let's start with your name though first. Your
Okay.
name and then your title, and then we can go into that. So we're gonna start over
Okay.
in 3, 2, 1.
I am Leroy Johnson. I'm a graduate of Booker T. Washington High School, but my grade school was Morehouse College. I'm a graduate of Morehouse College and decided to go to Atlanta University for a degree in political science. I had great professors that influenced me to go into the law. And I finished North Carolina Central University College in North Carolina and returned to Atlanta to go into the district attorney's office. And I was in the district attorney's office about 3 or 4 years. And I passed the bar while I was in the district attorney's office, and I set up my own law practice. And I have practiced law in the state of Georgia for 54 years. And during that process, I had an opportunity to run for the Senate of Georgia. In 1962, I was during the period of the civil rights movement, and I ran for the Senate from the 38th district. The county unit system had been destroyed by a federal case which says one man, one vote. And so I ran for the legislature of Georgia. I was fortunate. I got elected to the Georgia legislature. The first time a black person had been elected to the legislature of Georgia in 100 years. In 1862, about that time, the Georgia legislature had 12 black members of that legislature, and they expurged, they put all of them out. And so it wasn't until 1962, when I ran for the office, that a black man had been elected to the legislature of Georgia. And at that time, all the facilities in the state capitol were segregated. There were signs over the water fountains saying colored and white. There was signs on the doors of the restrooms saying colored and white. And a black person had never eaten in the state cafeteria. And black person had never sat in the balcony of the state senate. And a black boy and girl had never served as a page in the state capitol of Georgia. And so my objective and my purpose was clear. I had to first desegregate the state capitol. And I did so by, every senator can appoint pages, that is, boys and girls, to aid them during that day. And the pages that I appointed, I had them to drink water from the fountain which says white. And I had them go to the men's bathroom, which says white men only, that said white. And I continued to do that for about 3 weeks, carrying the boys, having the boys to drink from the fountain that says white, go to the restroom that says white, and the same for the girls that I appointed. And about 3.5 weeks, the signs all came down over the water fountains and from the doors of the restaurant. From the doors of the bathroom. Now, what is so important is that a black person never ate in the state cafeteria. And so I decided to go with one of my friends from Fulton County, decided to go to the restaurant. And his name was Joe Salome. He was a part of the Fulton County delegation. And so we went to have lunch in the state cafeteria. And the lady stopped us at the door and says, "You can't come in here. We don't serve Negroes." And I told her I was a senator from the 38th district, with all the rights and privileges appertaining there too. And she said, "Well, you're not going to eat in here." And I suggested to her to go and see her supervisor. So she left and came back in about 15 minutes and says, "All right, come in." So we went in, got our food, went to the place where we had to cashiers, and we paid for the food, and walked into the cafeteria. Well, the seating arrangement was that you had these long tables and you had people sitting on each side of the table to eat. Well, we looked around and finally we saw a table where white people were sitting on one side, but there was 2-3 vacancies on the other side of the table. So Joe Salome, who was with me, we went to that particular table and he put his tray down. And I followed him, and I put my tray down. And when I put my tray down on the table, all the white people got up from the table and left. So we sat there to eat. And then a few minutes later, all the white people at the table across from us, next to us, left. And within 10 minutes, all the tables around us, where all white people were sitting to eat, they picked up their food and left. And so we had a whole area by ourselves. And I said to Joe, "Joe, we have a private area that we're eating now in the state cafeteria of the state capitol." But we desegregated the state capitol. And the next day I had my friend QB Williamson, who was a black member of the board of the city council. I called him and he went to lunch with me. But that's the way we desegregated the city council. And what is so important in my story is that when I was elected in '62 and took office in '63, not one senator from South Georgia, North Georgia spoke to me. I would walk down the hall and meet a senator going in the opposite direction. And I would say, "Good morning, Senator." And his reply would be, "Mm. And that happened continuously for the whole session. None of them would speak. And so that was an experience that I had, and I had to do 2 things. Number one, I had to make certain that they knew that a black man could be just an effective senator as a white man. If he had this education ability, and I finished Morehouse, I finished Atlanta University, and got a law degree from North Carolina Central Law School. So I had the credentials. It wasn't the credentials that they were concerned about, but they just didn't speak to me because I was black and they were white. And but that was a part of my history. I had the good fortune of finishing a great school like Morehouse. Morehouse awarded me the Benjamin E. Mays Trailblazing Award, which was one of the great awards that Morehouse gives. And so that was just a part of my background. I'm now writing my memoirs, and I hope to finish within the next 4 or 5 months, which will tell this story of my journey of a black man in a white man's legislature.
Thank you for sharing that. Excuse me. One of the markers we're going to put up will acknowledge the efforts of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. You want to talk about SNCC?
SNCC was an organization of students who had to come together to coordinate the activities of students throughout the South, in Georgia, Arkansas, Virginia. All the students was moving to desegregate that particular area, wherever they were, that state or that city. And SNCC had a very important role to try to coordinate their activities, to make sure that they were had some sufficient assistance in doing whatever they wanted to do, to make sure that they were properly organized to do what they wanted to do. And so in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, all of those states, SNCC was first headquarters in Baltimore, I believe. But anyway, they came to Atlanta, and the headquarters was in Atlanta. And Julian Bond was one of the great leaders there, and there's another young lady who worked with Julian in SNCC. But they were in a very effective organization and very needed, because you had to coordinate the activities, and the students wanted to do something to make certain that they were treated equally as other people.
And let's talk about the desegregation of city.
Well, before you move on, what did you have the occasion, Senator, to work with John Lewis when he was in SNCC in Atlanta, or?
John Lewis was a part of SNCC. John Lewis, Julian Bond, and another young lady, I can't remember her name now, was kind of the head honchos in SNCC. But my contact was mainly with Lonnie King from Morehouse, Ben Brown from Clark, Herschel Sullivan from Spelman, and students from that university system. But they were the leaders of the Atlanta University group system of students in the student movement. But I did have the opportunity to work very closely with John Lewis.
Right, and that was Ruby Doris Smith. You were.
Yes, Ruby
Right.
Doris Smith was with SNCC. Yes.
Okay. The desegregation of municipal facilities. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, let me say this, because it is, I think, necessary. Most Atlanta think about the desegregation of Atlanta because of the lunch counters, you see. And there is a belief that the Civil Rights Act of 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, which says that schools in this country was desegregated, that desegregated the whole South. But Brown versus the Board of Education desegregated schools, the school system in America. But Brown versus the Board of Education did not desegregate the city of Atlanta. It was the student movement that desegregated the city of Atlanta. And I'm not so sure that we actually give credit to the students for that specific job. But when you look at it, it was the uncompromising position of the student against an evil system of segregation, using a nonviolent method of marching and desegregating the city that desegregated Atlanta. It was great. The Civil Rights Act of 1954 was a great act and was slow in coming, but it did not segregate Atlanta. What segregated Atlanta was, number one, the suit that the student movement members filed, Brown versus the City of Atlanta. And Brown versus the City of Atlanta desegregated all the city facilities that were segregated, the auditoriums, the theaters, the arenas, the parks, That decision desegregated the the laws of Atlanta dealing with segregation. The second thing that happened because of the student movement was the desegregation of restaurants and hotels. The governor of Georgia, who was Lester Maddox, owned a restaurant called the Pickwick, and he stood in the door with an axe and says, "No black people will eat in this restaurant." See, and the students protested, and then they went to the Heart of Atlanta motel for rooms, and they wouldn't permit them to come in, and they protested that. And so the Heart of Atlanta filed a suit against the United States government saying that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 did not apply to them. And the court ruled just the reverse. The court said that the 1964 Civil Rights Act applied across the board and throughout America. And so the restaurant was desegregated and the motel was desegregated, all because of the pressure that the student movement had brought about. And so those were the things that desegregated the Atlanta, along with the desegregation of the counters downtown, that is the Rich's department store. Now everybody know about Rich's. They do not know about Brown versus the City of Atlanta. They do not know about the hotel suit, but they know about the lunch counter situation, and that's very important. What happened there was that Lonnie King and the students had to make a decision. They were going every day protesting and demonstrating in the downtown area, mainly the Rich's department store and but mainly Rich's and other lunch counters. But Rich's, the head of Rich's represented the persons involved in the Chamber of Commerce for all downtown markets. See? So they just hammered away at Rich's. As a result of that, that's where the desegregation came in. Now let me tell you the story about that. The students was animate in their attack meaning their marching on downtown, and they did it religiously every day. I had a personal interest because I had learned to have a great interest in Lonnie King. Lonnie King was 19 or 20, and he had to make great decisions. And a young person making those kind of decisions, it was an awful burden on him. But he stepped up to the plate. And there was a great meeting at Memorial Church. Is it Memorial? It's Warren Memorial. Warren Memorial Church. This was the essence of the civil rights movement, the height of the civil rights movement downtown. What happened is that the students had put so much pressure on the downtown merchants that they got with the black members of Atlanta, which included A.T. Walden, C.A. Baycoat, Warren Cochran, and many other leaders, and to try to work out a proposal to stop the demonstrations. So they came up with a proposal. The proposal suggested that if the students would stop demonstrating for 6 months, they would desegregate Atlanta, the hotels in it, the restaurants in Atlanta, the downtown restaurants, including the Rich's and other stores. That was the proposal. Lonnie King and others had to respond to that, and black leaders was telling them that this is something that you ought to do, and they did not trust all black leaders, and they didn't trust any of the white leaders downtown area. So it was a tremendous burden that they had to make. So they decided to go ahead with the with the decision to accept the proposal. Well, when they got back to the student body at Atlanta University, the students all thought it was the worst thing that could happen. They reneged on it. We do not want this to happen, see. So Lonnie King says, I'm going to have to reverse it. We cannot accept this. And he called a meeting at Warner Memorial Church. The pastor of that church was Reverend Creasy. And so we had a meeting there. That meeting, the church was packed on that night. And the students were there, and the Atlanta black community was there. And the question was whether or not the students would accept. They said, no, we're not going to accept it, whether they would reverse that decision and accept the proposal of the merchants downtown. Black leaders began to speak, asking them to do that. Two speeches are important. One was from A.T. Walden. A.T. Walden was one of the first black lawyers in Atlanta. And he was the first black appointed municipal judge in Atlanta and in the South. And he represented what the students would refer to as the old guard. And he spoke that night and told the students that if they would accept the proposal, that he, Walden, would march with them if the white people reneged on their promise. The students did not accept that. The students did not believe that. For some reason, they didn't have the trust in Walden that maybe some of us thought they should have had, but they had a reason for not. And other black leaders spoke at that meeting, asking the students to reconsider their decision. But the thing that saved the meeting, the one speech that saved the meeting and caused the students to change their mind was a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. I was on the stage, I was on the platform where we were speaking. And he said to the students, among other things, if you decide to accept the recommendation of the white merchants and stop marching, stop your demonstration, say if you decide to do that, I, Martin Luther King Jr., will march with you if they reneged on their word. If they say they
Continue, I'm sorry.
if they say that they're not going to do it, I will march with you. It was that speech that electrified the audience. It was that speech. But for that, they would never change their mind. When Martin Luther King said, I will march with you if they renege, if they decide that they're not going to desegregate the counters, after you have stopped your demonstration, I will march with you. That was the height of the meeting. Now, Walden said the same thing, but the students didn't believe that. The students did believe in Martin Luther King Jr., and they reversed their position and say, we will accept the proposal of the merchants from downtown. And they did that, and the demonstration stopped for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, the riches and the other kept their word and desegregated downtown. And that's what happened, and that's the story.
Okay, let's talk about the Atlanta Inquirer.
The Atlanta Inquirer was founded by a professor from Clark University and Jesse Hill. The professor was, and I'll get it for you in just a minute, the professor from Atlanta University and Jesse Hill. And then they had a board of directors. And on the board of directors was was Jesse Hill, Herman Russell, Dr. Dr. Warner, Dr. Warner. I was on the board of directors. Clarence Coleman was on the board of directors of the Atlanta Inquirer. And the Inquirer was a paper that was in tune with what the student movement was doing. Now, we had another newspaper in Atlanta, the Atlanta Daily World, and we had the Atlanta Constitution, Atlanta Journal. All of them were fine papers, but many of them did not reflect the views of the student movement in terms of their goal, their purpose, their ambition, and what they were marching for. The Atlanta Inquirer became really the newspaper of the student movement because they believed in their goals and their objectives. They wanted to desegregate Atlanta, and so did the members, the board of directors of the Atlanta Inquirer wanted to support the student movement and wanted to improve the welfare of the black folks in Atlanta. The relationship between the Inquirer and the student movement was very significant because it hierarched and pushed the newspaper into a most favored position in the community. The Inquirer became a very influential paper in the community. And in the election in the mayoral election between Ivan Allen and Muggsy Smith, the Atlanta Inquirer played a very great role. They supported Ivan Allen, and other black leaders supported Muggsy Smith, but Ivan Allen won. So Atlanta Inquirer became a paper to be reckoned with in Atlanta.
Wonderful. Let's talk about the movement lawyers, Donald Hollowell, Howard Moore Jr., and the impact that they had on the Atlanta student movement.
At the Hollowell, Don Hollowell was a great lawyer, and Moore was a part of his firm, and Vernon Jordan became a part of his firm later on, and so was Horace Ward. All of them were great lawyers. All of them were my friends, and all of them had a dedication to human justice. And they did what lawyers should do, and they represented the students. Now, there was an adult liaison committee in Atlanta, and I was a part of that committee, along with Q.B. Williamson and Clarence Coleman and others. But our job as the liaison committee was to provide funds to get the students out of jail and to coordinate the relationship between the students and the community. And we did that. When the student got in jail, Q.B. Williamson put together a program or a project by which we would provide money for the students to get out of jail. But Hollowell and Ward and Moore did a magnificent job of representing the students when called upon to do so.
And did you want to talk about the Freedom Riders and their impact?
No, but obviously they had an impact. The question was interstate travel, buses, trains, and what have you. And even though the law says segregation had to go, the truth of the matter is that when you got inside the bus or bus station, you had desegregation. You had segregation, and the same was. And what happened is that when the students began that movement of traveling from state to state, bus to bus, they discovered that the law said one thing, but the practice was another. The law said you could not have segregation, but the practice was there was segregation in fact. And it was disposing of that that caused that federal government to revise a part of the law and to make certain that in interstate commerce there was no segregation. Yes, uh, Reverend Boone was what we refer to as a person who had made a decision that segregation was wrong, and all of his movement was against segregation and a segregated society. I did not. I have not been. I was not a part of, and he had a great movement even in his church, dealing with just that issue. I was not a part of that, but I knew of his reputation in the Atlanta community, which was always opposed to segregation, discrimination, and he opened his church to the students, for the students to come in, to have meetings, and he gave advice, but it was extremely helpful. And there was very few people like Reverend Boone, John Boone. He was a great preacher, but his great contribution was his commitment against an evil system of segregation.
Reverend Joseph Eagle.
Joseph Boone, yes.
Anything else you want to talk about in terms of the political climate in the city of Atlanta during the time that the students were mobilizing, and the reaction of the politicians to these efforts?
Perhaps the only thing that I really want to say is that I don't believe that the city of Atlanta, even though they gave Lonnie King an award, I believe, a year ago, but what this took, the student movement was in the 60s, and that's a long time to wait to get an award, and I just don't think that we realize, we meaning Atlantans realize the real value of the student movement. They think of the student movement as a movement against the downtown merchant of Rich's department store and lunch counters. That was the student movement. And that was, in fact, was not the student movement. That was a part of it. But the Civil Rights Act of 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, statement was clear to the world that school segregation would not be tolerated in America. But Brown versus
Pause, sorry. Phone.
And we'll just pick up where you left off, and we'll edit the phone ringing out.
okay.
Okay, I think she got it.
But I just want to make the point that Brown versus the Board of Education.
Can I count you in so that we get a clean start?
Okay.
I give you a quick 3 second. All right? 3, 2, go.
I want to make sure that we understand that Brown versus the Board of Education, which was a great decision by the Supreme Court and long overdue, made segregation illegal and segregation of schools illegal in America. But it did not desegregate the city of Atlanta and the facilities in the city of Atlanta and the municipal facilities in the city of Atlanta. It did not do that. The student movement did that. And I think we have to recognize them for that. They desegregated the city of Atlanta. And I think that somewhere in history, the city of Atlanta ought to recognize that fact. I know they're doing a great job in doing things over by the Atlanta University system, but that's an area which people have to go through who visited. But if yearly, on the 15th or whatever day they want to choose, that the mayor and the city council would, on television, would say thanks to the student movement for what they did to desegregate Atlanta. Now, I'm not talking about closing businesses like they do the Martin Luther King Day. I'm not talking about that. But I'm just talking about a day of recognition that this is what actually happened in Atlanta. We love the Supreme Court decisions dealing with the segregation, but those decisions did not desegregate Atlanta. It was a student movement. And Brown versus City of Atlanta, the hotel, the Heart of Atlanta Hotel versus United States, and the movement from down and the desegregation movement at Rich's department store. Those are the three things that desegregate Atlanta. And I'm real proud to have had a part of it. I'm proud to have served on the committee that had to raise money to get the students out of jail and had to be a part of translating the students' motives and position to the Black Atlanta community. I'm proud of having that, and I'm proud of the relationship I developed with Lonnie King during that period of time.
Councilmember, did you think of any other questions?
Well, Senator, can you tell us anything about the myth of Atlanta, the city too busy to hate? And what was that, how did that come about, or how did that mythology arise out of the movement?
The slogan, the myth that Atlanta too busy to hate, came about as a result of action that was taken by the mayor of Atlanta, who was Ivan Allen. Ivan Allen was a far cry from Maddox, who was the governor of Georgia. He's a far cry. And he had assisted, he had done things in moving Atlanta forward that black people approved of. He had a meeting, Ivan had a meeting at the Butler Street Y, and at that meeting was Walden, Cochran, A.T. Walden, Warren Cochran, Atlanta thing, C.A. Baycoat, John Wesley Dobbs, all leaders of the black community. And Ivan Allen said that he was going to Washington to testify that segregation was wrong, that segregation had to go. Some of the black people in that meeting said, that's fine, that's what you ought to do. And other black people said, and there was one or two who said that if you do that, you're going to kill yourself. That is, you're going to be persona non grata to the whole white political establishment. If you go to Washington during this time and say that segregation ought to go. And somewhere Ivan Allen said, or someone said, Atlanta is too busy to hate. But that came up there. And of course, that might have been true for that particular period. But it wasn't true as it related to Atlanta relationship, when we had to make Atlanta do things that they ought to done. If they were too busy to hate, then the student ought not to have the Brown versus the City of Atlanta to desegregate the parks and auditorium and arenas and things like that, you know. So it turned out to be a good slogan, but it wasn't a slogan that Atlanta has always lived up to. But I'm proud of Atlanta because we did have a city where you had great leaders like Ivan Allen and like the editor of the Atlanta Constitution, and you had the chairman of the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, who was president of the Citizen Southern Bank, Mills B. Lane. You had Mills B. Lane. and those leaders made it possible for us not to have the kind of rioting and problem that they had, say, in Birmingham, when they when they sought to desegregate the facilities in Birmingham. The, but that's how the, the, the slogan of Atlanta is too busy to hate came about. They was trying to say to Ivan Allen, and Ivan Allen was trying to say that I have to go because Atlanta's too busy to hate. But that became a good slogan for Atlanta, PR situation. But that's how it came about.
Just two things more, Senator, before we let you go.
That's
Is,
okay.
I know there was a riot in Summerhill. I think, were you on the scene of that riot?
Yeah.
As I recall, the story I was told that you were there and you assisted Ivan Allen in bringing, I guess, restoring some order.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, it is. There was a riot there, and Ivan Allen came out, and I was there. But it was Stokey Carmichael group who was very, very effective in trying to desegregate all over America. And we had a problem in Summerhill, and it came as a result. I think Carmichael was in Atlanta at that time, or he was scheduled to come to Atlanta, one or the other. But anyway, we did have a problem. It wasn't one that got out of hand to the extent to which there was any death involved. Nobody was killed, but it was a period in which it was a very frightful moment for people who lived in that area as to what would happen there. And we went out and we brought some people in to aid and assist in doing some of the things that they said they wanted, like providing for a better area for children to play in. And one thing particularly was that they was concerned about a playground, to have an area where where the children could play. Well, what we did was go out there and get a lot and had the city to provide certain materials, active for that lot, like swings and spring and boards and that sort of thing. But it lasted about 3 days, and I guess the good thing about it is there was no one was killed in that process, but it was a disturbance that demanded an attention. And I don't know they would have gotten attention if Carmichael had not come. It probably would have been stayed as it was. But when he came, and the people, he spoke out there, and they reacted to it, and then there was a disturbance. And of course, my job was to try to make certain that, number one, nobody was hurt, and number two, we could resolve their differences, and we did that. Yeah.
And well, really, there's two things I want to ask you about. One is your continued service in the Senate after your initial, I guess, first term. How did the legislators eventually end up interacting with you during this, I guess it was a decade or 12 years you served?
Yes. After the first year, things began to. After the first year, things began to get better. Get better meaning this, that for the first year, none of the senators from South Georgia spoke or North Georgia spoke to me. At the end of the second year, at the end of the first year, I was on a committee, and I was late going to a committee meeting. And when I got to the room where the committee was having a meeting, I opened the door and walked in, but before I got there, the, in a committee meeting, they examine the bills that come in, and they make a determination in that committee meeting whether or not to vote the bills out or to keep them in the committee. If they vote the bill out, then the bill come out of the committee and goes to the floor of the Senate to be voted on. If they if they do not vote the bill out of the committee, the bill would die in the committee. So when I got to the door where the meeting was being held, the meeting had already started, and they had already voted to vote some bills out and to keep some in. And when I walked in the door, the senators who was there jumped up from the some of them jumped up from the table and rushed over to me, and some of them actually touched me and said, "Senator, I need your vote." Well, what had happened is that they had a tie vote on a bill that was to be reported out. And a tie vote means that the bill stays in the committee. They have to have a majority of the votes to get the bill out of the committee to go to the floor. Well, the votes was tied. I didn't know that when I walked in the door. Those senators got up, rushed over to me, and touched me and said, "Senator, I need your vote." Now, this was the first time in the whole session that any senator spoke to me. And when they touched me, I said to myself, what happened to my blackness? But they said, "I need your vote." I realized then, if I had never realized it before, the importance of the vote. Those men who had not spoken to me for the whole session, when I walked in, instead of seeing the black senator they had not spoke to, they saw a vote coming in the door, and they wanted my vote. And they rushed over to me, grabbed me by my, put their hands on me and says, "Senator, I need your vote." That was the first time that any of them had spoken to me for the whole session. I knew then the value of the vote. I knew then that in a situation like that, you have to take advantage of the situation. I had two bills that I had already sent to that committee that they had decided that they were going to not vote on. They're going to send it to what they call the cemetery committee. And of course, my negotiation was that if you get my two bills, bring my two bills up and vote them and vote my bills out, I'll vote with you to send your bill out. They did that in 10 minutes. My bills was brought up, they voted my bills out. I voted with them, and their bills went out. But that was the first time that they spoke to me that second. The second year, things were better, and one fellow from Enigma, Georgia, one senator from Enigma, Georgia, came up to me and said, "Senator, I want to shake your hand," and really apologized to me for not speaking to me for the whole session, for the following session. But that's what happened, and from then on, I began to move more effectively. The Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Senate, George T. Smith, appointed me to the first, to be chairman of the first black chairman of a standing committee, and that was the Scientific Research Committee. He appointed me there. And then later on in my career, 2 or 3 years later, I was appointed as chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Now, the most powerful committees in the Senate is the Judiciary Committee, the Finance Committee, the Education Committee. These are the really important committees in the Senate. And we had a situation in the Senate which demanded a vote. In the Senate, there was a rule which says that the President of the Senate names committee chairman and members to a committee. That was the rule. Well, Lester Maddox was the president of the Senate at that time. The governor was Carter. Carter wanted to change the rules so that committee chairmen and members of the committee would be appointed by a committee and not by the lieutenant governor. That was the issue. So I sat back and watched the senators on both sides fight with each other. And when it appears that it was going to be very close, Carter came to me. Carter sent for me, and I went to his office. And he said, Senator, I need you to vote with me on this bill. And I said, Governor, I want to be chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And he says, oh, I don't know that I can do that. I don't know, but I'll appoint you chairman of the committee dealing with alcohol beverages. Whatever committee. I said, I don't want that chairmanship. I want the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee. And he said to me, I can't do that. Now, Lester Maddox was working through Cover Kidd. Cover Kidd was a senator from Milledgeville, his right-hand person. He came to me and said, Senator, we need your vote. The lieutenant governor needs your vote. I said, I want to be chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Cover Kidd said, I have to go back and discuss it with Maddox. A day later, he came back and said that we'll make you chairman of the Judiciary Committee if you vote with us. I went to Carter and I said, Governor, the lieutenant governor and his people have offered me the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee. I would prefer voting with you if you give me that chairmanship. He says, no, I can't do it. I can't do that. He said, that's one of the most important committees in the Senate. I said, Governor, that's why I want it, because it was. He says, I can't do that. But I will make you chairman of some other kind of committee. I says, I don't want that. So Governor Carter said to me, well, you can't vote with Maddox because Maddox is one of the bad guys. He wears the black hat, I wears a white hat. And he's a segregationist and I'm not. So you can't vote with him. And I said, Governor Carter, you're making a great mistake. You're looking at the situation now, and I'm looking at the situation for in the future. If I'm chairman of that committee, it means that any black man coming into this Senate know that he can be chairman of a standing committee. And that's what I'm looking for. So he said to me, well, I'm not gonna name you. So I went back and told Cover Kidd. I said, Senator, I'll go with you providing that you give me the right to name 3 persons on the committee. Now the committee was a 7-person committee. If I had the right to name 3, and the chairman can vote also, I would have enough members, I have enough votes to get the bill out of the committee that I wanted. So Cover Kidd said, I have to go back to the governor and the lieutenant governor and find out. He goes back to Maddox and came back to me later and said, we will do that. We'll give you chairmanship of the committee and you'll have the right to appoint 3 members. You have the right to suggest 3 members to be appointed. I said, okay. That was the deal. The vote came up the next day, and believe me that somebody up there likes me because the vote was, determination of who won the vote was by 1 vote. 1 vote made the difference. And the Lieutenant Governor Maddox won the vote, made me chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And I appointed the first, we had an office, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee had an office in the Senate. The first black to have an office in the Senate. I appointed the first black secretary, female secretary to the committee, to being in the state capitol for my committee. And I appointed the first black person to serve as an administrative assistant. And that person was a Morehouse graduate, and his father was a lawyer that served with, I have his name in just a minute, that served with His father was a lawyer that I knew well, but his son was at Morehouse, and I appointed him as the first black assistant to a standing committee in the Senate. And so at that point, I had no problems with the senator speaking to me and not speaking to me. From that point on, I was accepted, what I think, into the inner sanctum. Began to move with effectiveness. But what I learned from that experience is that in politics, you get not what you deserve, but what you can negotiate. Now, I deserved the chairmanship because I was qualified. I had a degree from Morehouse, a degree from Atlanta University in political science, a degree from from my law school. So it wasn't a question of credentials. But I learned that in politics, you get not what you deserve, but what you can negotiate. And I was able to negotiate that very effectively. But that's a part of Michael, of my relationship. One other thing, let me just say, when I knew that I had been accepted by the senators, I was a member of the Finance Committee, and a senator by the name of Hollis, Senator Hollis, from Albany, Georgia, was chairman of the Finance Committee. Well, there were about 25 people on the Finance Committee. So Senator Hollis came to me on that particular day and said, Senator, we're having a meeting upstairs on the third floor during the lunch period. He said, come up and meet with us. I said, okay. He didn't tell me what the meeting was about or anything like that. So I went to lunch and I didn't hurry back, but when I got back, the meeting had started. And there were about 13 senators up there, all around a big table. And they were sitting there, doling out. They were sitting there determining what these 13 senators needed from the budget to go back into their district. And when I walked in the room, I sat there, and they asked Senator Kidd, said, Senator Kidd, what do you need? And he says, I need $50,000 for Milledgeville Hospital or something of that nature. And they go around the table and say, what do you need, Senator? One senator from North Georgia said, I need $25,000 for something in his district. And they went around the table, and every one of them said they needed whatever they needed from out of the budget, see? Well, I sat there with amazement, because I always thought when we got to the committee meeting, the question came up about who was going to get what. As always done in the committee meeting, you have to stand up and you have to state what you wanted and have to justify it and you have to vote on it, see. That was not so. They upstairs determined how the money was to be spent on those who were there, and there was 13 of there. So when it got to me, the Senator's Hollis says, Senator, what do you need? So I said, Senator, excuse me just a minute, I have to go to the men's room. I said, I'll be right back. So I went out of the meeting, picked up the phone, and called the Urban League, talked to Clarence Coleman. And I said, Clarence, I got an opportunity to get some money for the Urban League, but I got to have a program, a project. Do you have anything? He said, we have a program trying to teach black folks how to pass the merit examination, and says we need about $50,000 to do that as seed money. I said, okay, Clarence, that's all I need. I go back into the committee meeting, and then when Senator Hollis get back to me, he says, Senator, what you need? I said, Senator, I need $50,000 to teach Georgians how to pass the civil service bill, how to pass the civil bill. He says, okay, who do you want to handle it? What source in government you want to handle it? I said, I want it to be handled through the Department of Labor. And that was Sam Caldwell, who was chairman of who was Commissioner of Labor, but he was my dear friend. So I said, I want to handle it through the Commissioner of Labor. He said, okay. So I got my $50,000 in the budget. We went back downstairs after the meeting. After he called the meeting to order, the chairman did, and they went through the budget as if the meeting upstairs had never taken place. But one thing he said before he adjourned the meeting upstairs, he says, what we have decided on here, I'm expecting all of you to vote when we get downstairs. And I want you to swear in, and I've never heard this before, I want you to swear in blood that you'll support the decision that we made here. Everybody said yes. They go downstairs, and we had the meeting of the Finance Committee. They voted the budget out, how the money was to be spent, and that was it. It was only on that occasion that I realized at last that I had been counter-accepted by the senators, because that wasn't a meeting that everybody knew about. That was a meeting that took place only in the Finance Committee, and when Hollis asked me to come.
Yes, sir, we're speeding.
Okay. I think it's amazing. That's the same Lester Maddox that appointed you chair of the Judicial Commission. They used to keep black people out of his restaurant with an accent. That's amazing to me.
Yes, yes it is, yes it is.
And what I'd like for you to comment on is something you're famous for, using your skill at the Georgia legislature to help a world figure, Muhammad Ali. How did you aid and assist him in returning to the ring?
That is, okay, I'm sorry, I got to look at you. Okay, but that's one of the things that I think that is at the top of my list in terms of my personal contribution. I was sitting in my office and I got a call from a fellow by the name of Harry Pett. He had a son-in-law in New York who was in the boxing area business. And he had called Harry Pett and said that some 56 cities had turned Ali down. He could not get a license to box. And if Harry Pett knew anybody in Atlanta who could get a license for Ali. Harry Pett told me that he said to his son-in-law, well, I don't know anybody, but I'm going to call a black fella by the name of Senator Leroy Johnson and ask him if he knows anyone. See? So I got a call from Harry Pett asking me if I knew anybody or if I could get a license for Ali to fight in Atlanta. My answer to him was, I'm not sure, but let me call you back in a couple of days and give you an answer. So I had the people in my law firm to search the law to find out if there was any law in Georgia dealing with boxing commission. To my surprise, there was not a law in Georgia dealing with the question of boxing or dealing with a boxing commission. If there's no state law, then what will govern in Georgia would be the municipal law, the area in which you live, like Atlanta or Savannah or Macon or what have you. But it would be that law that would apply. So when I saw that, I called Harry Pett and said, Harry, I can get a license for Ali to fight in Atlanta. So he says, well, let me talk to my son-in-law. So he talked to his son-in-law. His son-in-law called me, and we made arrangements for him to come down, and we met at the hotel, one of the hotels by the airport. And we sat there for 6 or 7 hours, and we talked about putting together a contract. And we did agree on a contract. And my job was to get a license for him to practice. I mean, for him to box in Atlanta. The hurdle I had to overcome was I had to get the city council, the mayor, to agree. And then I had to get the governor of the state to agree. Then I had to have a place for the license, for the boxing match to take place. So the first thing I did was to go to the city council. And it just so happens that the members of the city council were my friends. Marvin Arrington, QB Williamson, Jackson, Casakas, all the fellas on the city council I knew. And I met with each one of them and told them what I wanted to do. I wanted to get a license for LE. They all agreed to help me. The next step was to go to the mayor, who was Sam Massell. Well, Sam Massell was my friend. I had helped him get elected. And we had a good relationship. So I went to the mayor, Massell, and told him that I wanted to get a license for LE. But the first thing he said to me is that, oh no, he says, that is just awful. He says, the White Citizen Council, the Ku Klux Klan, says too hard of issues. It's just, if we agreed to do that, we're going to have problems. So I let him finish, and then I said, Sam, there's an old saying in politics that politicians consider to be a truism. He said, what is that? I said, that saying is that you dance with the one who brung you. That is the basis of politics. See? So Sam stopped for a moment, and he said, Leroy says, I think you're right, because I owe you one. He says, on with the fight, and anything I can do to help you, let me know. But he said to me, it's not, I will assist you, but you're probably going to be with the governor. I said, Sam, thank you. So I had the city council member, and I had the mayor. And the next thing was the governor. Well, before I went to the governor, I called Carl Sanders, who was the governor of the state when I got elected in '63. And I said, it's Governor Sanders. I said, here's the opportunity I have. I got an opportunity to get Ali get a license for Ali so he can fight in Atlanta. I say, but some 56 cities had turned him down. This is going to be a tough job. I say, but before I go to see the governor, I wanted you to know what I was doing, and I need your assistance. I may need your assistance somewhere down the line. And Carl Sanders said to me, Leroy, we go back a long way, and if I can do anything to help you, I will. But your problem is going to be with Maddox. See, I said, okay. So the next day, after talking to Carl Sanders, then I went to see Maddox. And I sat in his office, and I said, Governor, I need to talk to you about a problem that I'm having. Now, just before I talked to Maddox, the week before I went to see Maddox, Maddox's son had been arrested and had been arrested in DeKalb County for, I think, stealing things that go on a car. What do you call it? Some misdemeanor, but hubcap. Stealing hubcaps from a car. See? They had his trial 2 days before I went to see Maddox. And the governor in DeKalb County said to, the judge in DeKalb County said to Maddox's son, after going through all the evidence, said, every man deserves a second chance. So instead of sending you to jail, I'm going to have you to report back to the court on the weekends. and but there'd be no jail sentence. But every man deserved a second chance. And so he worked out something where Maddox's son would report to the courthouse on a certain day each week, a certain day each for several weeks. But that was it. So when I sat there talking to Maddox, I told him I want to get a license for Ali to fight in Georgia. I told him that Ali was the only thing that he knew to do was to fight. That he did not want to go on welfare. Well, Maddox was opposed to welfare. And I said, after talking to him a period of time, I said, Governor, every man deserves a second chance. And I think that had alienated, that had something to do with his thinking. Because when I said that, he looked at me and said, Senator, on with the fight. Mm-hmm. So I said, thank you, Governor. I walked out of his office. Harvey Murray from the WSB was outside. He said, Senator, what did the governor say? I said, the governor said on with the fight. So the Atlanta Journal had big headlines that the governor said on with the fight that evening. And by 8:30 or 9 o'clock, somebody shot in my window. And I learned the next day that the White Citizen Council had sent letters to Maddox and had also sent letters to the state capitol. They sent it to his home and to the state capitol, telling them that they were opposed to Ali fighting in Atlanta. See? So the next day, Maddox reneged on his promise and told the Constitution that Ali would not fight in Georgia. He had reversed his position. So I called Carl Sanders and I said, Governor, we have a problem. Maddox has reversed his position. He says that that the fight will not take place, that Ali will not fight in Atlanta. I says, I don't know what we're going to do now. So Carl Sanders said to me, let me give some thought to it and I'll call you back. Well, Carl Sanders had appointed the Attorney General. And when he left office, the Attorney General was still in office, and Maddox kept the Attorney General that Carl Sanders had appointed. So Carl Sanders talked with the Attorney General. And as a result of the talking with the Attorney General, he called me back and said, Senator, read the papers in the morning, I think you'll be satisfied with it. The Attorney General, who was Attorney General under Maddox but was appointed by Carl Sanders, said that the governor had no authority to stop the fight because Georgia had no laws on its books dealing with the boxing matches, dealing with the fight and boxing matches, and Georgia had no boxing commission. That the only person who could stop the fight would be the municipality where the fight is being held, and that's the city of Atlanta, the mayor, and the city council. So when that came up, it came in the Constitution the next day, Maddox was asked by the papers and others, what are you going to do? And Maddox's answer was that I'm not going to fight with the Attorney General. So that cleared the way with the governor's office. That means that we could then put the fight on in Atlanta. I then called Harry Pett and told Harry Pett that we had okay now, we could get the fight. Ali was originally supposed to fight with Frazier. And Frazier, manager, a fellow named Durham, had told me, so we went to Durham. We went to Philadelphia to see Durham. And I called Marvin Arrington, asked Marvin Arrington to go with me to Philadelphia, and he said, okay. So we flew to Philadelphia. We talked to Durham. And Durham said that, I don't believe you can put him in, you can have him to fight in Atlanta, because too many states, 50 or more, had said no, he will never fight. and said the only way we would agree to have Frazier to fight him, that you put him in an exhibition fight before the time of the real fight. And if you do that, we will consider Frazier fighting him, because Frazier was the one that they wanted. So we left there, we came back to Atlanta, and that was our task. How can we put him in the ring before the main fight? We had only one place in Atlanta was large enough, and that was the City Auditorium. We didn't have we didn't have the facility that we have now in Atlanta. We didn't have the dome or anything like that. We had the City Auditorium. The City Auditorium would hold only 5,000 people. So I said to Jesse Hill, I said, Jesse, we don't want to go to put an exhibition downtown, because the White Citizen Council, the Ku Klux Klan will attack us, and we never put the fight. We never get the fight in Atlanta. We got to have the exhibition someplace where we can say that the White Citizen Council and Ku Klux Klan would not come. So we get into thinking, where can we have it? And I thought about Morehouse College. The president of Morehouse College then was Hugh Gloucester. Hugh Gloucester was my personal friend. So I called Hugh Gloucester and said, Hugh, we can put Ali into the ring if we can have a place where we can have an exhibition fight. Can we have it in Morehouse? And Hugh says, Senator, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. He called me back in less than 10 minutes and says, you can have it here at Morehouse. You can have a exhibition fight here at Morehouse. I said, okay. So we went back to Philadelphia and talked to Durham. And Durham says, yeah, I told you that, but I don't believe it's going to happen. So you're not going to be able to fight with Frazier. And he reneged on his promise in terms of having Frazier. So I came back, called my people in New York and told them what had happened. They said, we have to get somebody else. So we got Quarry. And Quarry became the person who would fight with Clay, with Ali rather, at the time. Even when we had the exhibition at Morehouse, and Ali fought two people at the exhibition, and had a long line of other people who fought at the exhibition. But even after we did that, Durham, who was the manager of Frazier, said, no, we're not going to let Frazier fight him. So we set October the 25th, 1970, for the fight at the City Auditorium with Quarry. When the fight came, 5,000 people only could go to the fight itself. And we had fights on the screen in other places. But at the auditorium, we held over 5,000 people. But on October the 26th, 1970, we were successful in Ali fighting Quarry, which was the fight that returned him to the ring. And of course, after that, he became again the world champion. But that's how we got that fight. And that's the process we had to go through to get it. But it was one of the things that I think that was at the top of my list of appreciation, the things that I had a role in doing, was getting that fight for Ali. And that's it, Councilman.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us or put on the record? Anything at all? Doesn't matter what subject.
Let's see. That,
One second, let me swap it. That one is closer to your face, I apologize.
backups.
Got to. All right, we're ready. Thank you. I'll
Let's
count
see.
you in.
Yeah,
3,
okay.
2.
The last thing that I want to say, the okay. The last thing I really like to point out to say is that the other lesson that I learned during my experience in the Senate of Georgia was this fact that the perception of power is as effective and as great as power itself. If you are perceived to have power, it is in fact as if you had the power that you may not have. But I learned that out of an experience that I had in the Senate. I had a bill that I had introduced in the Senate, and my Senate colleagues voted against the bill. And there's a rule in the Senate that if you have a bill that come up and is voted against, you can take the floor and ask for reconsideration, and the bill has to come up the next day to be reconsidered, and you have an opportunity to pass it. So I put my bill in, they voted against it, I asked for reconsideration, and the bill would come up the next day. So that evening, I went to the Senate, and we have what we call a watch line in the Senate. You can get on that line and call all over Georgia. You don't have to pay for it. You just call, see. And I called members of the we had an organization called the Georgia Voters League. The Georgia Voters League was founded by A.T. Walden. Black people could not become a part of the Democratic Voters League. I mean, the Democratic Party, even though black people were a part of the Republican Party, but black people were not a part of the Democratic Party. So A.T. Walden found the Georgia Democratic Club of all black leaders throughout the state. Now there's 59 counties in Georgia, and about, I guess, maybe 20 counties we had members of the Georgia Democratic Club in Augusta, Savannah, Macon, and South Georgia, and what have you. Walden was the president of the Georgia Democratic Club. I was assistant to Walden, and when Walden passed, I became president of the Georgia Democratic Clubs. And I had these members of the club all over Georgia. So when my bill was defeated on the Senate floor, I went to the watch line and began to call members of the Georgia Democratic Club, black folks all over Georgia, Augusta, Macon, and all South Georgia, and told them that I wanted them to call their senator and tell them to vote with me on tomorrow for my bill, that they were opposed to my bill and likely the bill of anything that had to do with helping black people. So I did that until about 11:30 or 12, and I started at 6 on the watch line calling leaders from throughout Georgia, black leaders throughout Georgia. When I walked into the Senate the next day, one senator from Athens, Georgia, Senator Brown, came up to me and said, "Senator, I had two people that called me last night to ask me to vote for your bill. And it says, I don't like that. I don't like to be pressured. And I want you to know that I don't like that at all. So I said, Senator Brown, I understand your position. Thank you. And they called the bill for reconsideration. And the first person to vote to reconsider my bill was Senator Brown from Athens. And other senators voted with me. And the bill came up and passed out of the Senate. Senator from Enigma, Georgia, came up to me and said, Senator, you got the greatest organization in the state. I had senators call me, I had members of the black community call me and ask me to vote for your bill. See, and say you got a powerful committee. I said, thank you, Senator. Now, I learned from that experience that the perception of power, they thought really that I had the power, and it was the perception of power is as effective as power itself. Now, the truth of the matter is that we had the organization, but the organization was not functioning, but I had all the contact with the people that was in the organization, and as far as that spread it, that concept that I had power and authority, spread it throughout the Senate. See, I never sought to discourage that at all. I permitted that to go right ahead. See, but I didn't have the power they thought I had, but I was perceived to have the power. And the lesson I learned, that in politics, the perception of power is as great as power itself. But that's what I just wanted to throw out, Michael.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
This has been wonderful.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
And
And
thank you
thank
for
you.
allowing us to come